In this video, I'm going to explore a range of responses to the Section A questions that appeared on the AQA English Language Paper 2 in November 2018. The exam paper and the source materials can be downloaded from the address that appears in the description section under the video. I'll also put the source materials up on the screen so that you can pause the video and read them without needing to print them out. For clarity, these are non-fiction texts and include an article by Peter Walker, which appeared in the Guardian newspaper in 2016 entitled "All Cyclists Fear Bad Drivers," and a magazine article written in 1896 entitled "On a Bicycle in the Streets of London" by Susan, Countess of Malmesbury. Please note that these are not exhaustive answers. I haven't said absolutely everything that there is to say, nor are they exemplars. Apart from question 1, rather than there being one correct answer, there are any number of answers which, with justification from the text, are as valid as one another. Presenting an exemplar answer runs the risk of effectively dismissing as wrong other interpretations or ideas that you may have had simply by not considering them. As a consequence, there is much more analysis here than you would ever have time to include under exam conditions. What you will find here, therefore, is a range of observations and analysis which could be said, rather than which should be said, in response to the questions. So to start, here are the source materials if you don't already have them printed out. Don't forget to read the introductory section at the top of the magazine article, as it will help you put what you read into context. So, question 1. Read again the first part of source A from lines 1 to 10. Choose 4 statements below which are true. Shade the circles in the boxes of the ones that you think are true. Choose a maximum of 4 statements. If you make an error, cross out the whole box. If you change your mind and require a statement that has been crossed out, then draw a circle around the box. A. Most people in Britain ride a bike regularly. B. Most UK cyclists are pleased about the number of dangerous incidents on the roads. C. The writer has never had a dangerous incident while cycling. D. The writer lives in southeast London. E. As the car passed, the writer did not swerve. F. The writer soon caught up with the driver. G. The writer thought the driver's actions had been pointless. H. It is rare to meet dangerous drivers while cycling. This question is worth 4 marks. This is a warm-up question, and getting full marks on it is extremely achievable as long as you read the relevant sections of the text closely to pick up on any subtleties in the language that can affect the meaning. It is a good idea to put a bracket around the section of text indicated to focus your reading. A. Most people in Britain ride a bike regularly. If we have a look at the text, we can see that the writer says, "Ask most people who ride a bike regularly in the UK." This can be a tricky one if we don't read it closely. The writer is talking about a subset of the UK population who ride a bike regularly, who, if you ask them, most of them would tell you about alarming incidents. So this statement is false. B. Most UK cyclists are pleased about the number of dangerous incidents on the roads. This one is also a bit tricky. The writer says they'll happily recount a list of terrifying or alarming incidents caused by the deliberate actions of another road user. The adverb happily here means willingly, What they are willing to do is talk about it. It doesn't mean that they're happy, demonstrated by the adjectives terrifying or alarming, about the prevalence of the incidents themselves. So this statement is false. C. The writer has never had a dangerous incident while cycling. At the beginning of the second paragraph, it says, "My last such incident happened just under a week ago." So this statement is also false. D. The writer lives in southeast London. On line 5, the writer says, "Near my home in southeast London." So this statement is true. E. As the car passed, the writer did not swerve. On lines 6 and 7, the writer says, "I was unharmed, but the driver was gambling on the assumption that I would not, for example, hit a sudden pothole and swerve or wobble." Had the writer hit a pothole which made him swerve, he would have been hurt. But he says, "I was unharmed," which means that he didn't swerve. So this statement is true. F. The writer soon caught up with the driver. If we look at line 8, we can see that the writer caught up with the driver at the next junction. So this statement is true. G. The writer thought the driver's actions had been pointless. If we look at lines 8 to 10, it says, "His relatively minor, but nonetheless very real, roll of the dice with my chances of making it home safely that evening had all been for nothing." The phrase "all been for nothing" means pointless. So this statement is true. H. It is rare to meet dangerous drivers while cycling. The writer's comment, "That's appallingly common," refers to drivers acting dangerously. So this statement is false. Now on to question 2. You need to refer to source A and source B for this question. Both sources describe the similar ways in which drivers behave. Use details from both sources to write a summary of what you understand about the similar behaviour of the drivers. There are 8 marks on offer here, which means that you've got about 10 minutes to answer the question. The trick here is to come up with a statement about the behaviour of the drivers that fits into the formula "the drivers in both sources," or "the behaviour of the drivers in both sources is." The drivers in both sources engage in deliberate actions which compromise the safety of other road users. In source A, Peter Walker complains that drivers overtake very closely and at speed, while in source B, the Countess of Malmesbury complains that hansom cab drivers pass so close and are also fond of cutting in just in front of you. The drivers in both the sources are willing to take risks where there is a plausible chance they could kill another human being. The drivers in both the sources behave as if cyclists do not have the same rights on the road as the drivers themselves. In source A, the writer complains that drivers' behaviour is motivated by an apparent belief that cyclists are obliged or even advised to ride in the gutter. In source B, the writer complains of the way the hansom cab drivers shout, even when the cyclist is occupying their lawful position in a string of vehicles. The behaviour of the drivers in both sources is irresponsible and reckless, although their motivations are different. Although the prospect of the actual harm they could inflict does not deter the drivers in either sources from their behaviour, Peter Walker does not feel that, although their actions in themselves are deliberate, that their intention is to injure. He puts their behaviour down to their gambling on certain assumptions, such as the quality of the road surface being good enough that he will not hit a sudden pothole and swerve or wobble, and also to their innate personality traits, with the implication that they are self-centred and impatient, only thinking about their own need to be first or in front as they barge past you on an escalator. On the other hand, there is a sense in source B that the motivation of the drivers is to injure. The Countess of Malmesbury ascribes their behaviour to sadistic and perhaps sexist pleasure-seeking, as they have devised a new sport of chasing the lady, where they seek to deliberately intimidate by shouting out "Hi!" when they have ample room to pass and try to kill her. In both sources, however, this behaviour stems from a selfish disregard for the safety of other people. Now on to question 3. You now need to refer only to source B from lines 8 to 18. How does the writer use language to describe her first experiences of cycling? This question is worth 12 marks. It's a good idea to put a bracket around the section of text indicated to focus your reading. The first sentence is long and contains a continuous list of all the things that she makes sure she can do, such as cutting figures of 8, before going out on the roads. This communicates that she is diligent and determined to have all the prerequisite skills, even though riding on a track began to bore her very early on, and that she takes riding a bicycle on public roads as a massive responsibility. She describes herself as being as nervous as a hare that feels the greyhound's breath. This choice of simile, characterising her as vulnerable and at risk of attack, casts her in the role of the delicate hare, racing for its life ahead of a large and aggressive dog, all in the pursuit of sport for another's entertainment, and reminds the reader of the hostility of the hansom cab drivers and the sadistic pleasure they get from tormenting her. Furthermore, the proximity of the predator to the prey, with the image of the greyhound's breath, communicates just how close she feels she is to coming to harm and creates tension. The use of sailing imagery when she launches her little bicycle onto the stormy oceans of Sloane Street not only effectively conveys the image of a rain-soaked road with its sibilant alliteration, but also highlights her vulnerability and the fragility of her bicycle with the contrast of little with the immensity implied in the hyperbolic metaphor oceans. This effectively conveys how intimidated she feels when going out on the roads for the first time. She uses sentence structure to great effect when she says, "The streets were really very clear, but I shall never forget my terror." The contrast between the two clauses separated by a comma and the conjunction but makes the reader wonder what it could have been to cause such an extreme reaction, as the first clause suggests that all is well. In actual fact, she does not describe what happens on both journeys at all, with the effect that the reader feels it is so awful that it cannot be put into words. Her elliptical style allows the reader to fill in the gaps for themselves. She describes herself using the hyperbolic phrase in a state bordering on collapse when she arrives home, which communicates that this first experience has been so terrifying that it has almost caused a mental and physical breakdown. Her final metaphor, "conquer their nervousness," with its battle imagery, evokes the bravery that she feels is required to go out cycling on hostile roads for the first time. Now on to question 4. For this question, you need to refer to the whole of source A, together with the whole of source B. Compare how the writers convey similar perspectives of cycling in the city. In your answer, you could compare their similar perspectives on cycling in the city, compare the methods the writers use to convey their perspectives, support your response with references to both texts. Both sources are written from the perspective of cyclists who feel that cycling in the city is very dangerous due to the behaviour of other road users. The way in which the writers use language to convey their perspectives differs, however, because the purpose of the two texts are different. Source A is a contemporary article in a broadsheet newspaper, written by an experienced cyclist, the purpose of which is to explore the ways in which cyclists' lives are put at risk and, as a result, to educate drivers to take more care. Source B, on the other hand, is a magazine article written at the end of the 19th century by an aristocratic woman, which is intended purely as entertainment for its readers, with her daring tales of hair-raising adventures as a new cyclist. The tone of the language in Source A is serious throughout, and the writer uses emotive language to introduce the topic of terrifying or alarming incidents caused by the deliberate actions of another road user. Using the phrase deliberate actions frames the cyclist as an innocent victim from the very start. The writer uses an anecdote early on in the article to illustrate one such alarming incident, before moving on to explore the implications of this, using facts and statistics to build a detailed and logical argument. The writer himself says it's not about morals, it's simple physics, as he lets the numbers speak for themselves. The contrast between a cycle going at 12 miles per hour, imparting something like 1200 joules of kinetic energy, and when doing 30 miles per hour you're suddenly at 100,000 joules, is shocking. And the writer only needs to follow this with the simple understatement that it's a very different impact. At the end of the article, after the writer has built his case, he directly addresses the reader using the imperative form. Remember that these are human beings. Rather than directly commanding drivers to change their behaviour, this is designed to remind them of their humanity so that they will feel guilty and want to change their behaviour, rather than feel resentful at being lectured. The writer of source B, bound by the rules of social etiquette tied to her position and her gender, uses language, therefore, that is much more understated and in a more formal register than the language in source A, to communicate how dangerous she feels it is for cyclists. Whereas Walker in source A uses hard-hitting language to directly address drivers to remind them of how vulnerable cyclists are, Malmesbury uses understatement to emphasise her own vulnerability. It would be nicer, to use a mild expression, if he'd not try to kill me. This politeness juxtaposed with the brutal reality of her potential death creates irony, thus creating a cheerful, naive perspective. Rather than use an initial anecdote as a foundation for building an argument for better awareness of other road users like Walker, Malmesbury instead merely relates a series of entertaining and hair-raising reflections and anecdotes that do not lead to any particular conclusion, and at no point does she directly address her arch-enemy in order to chastise them in a bid to get them to change their behaviour. She seems to accept that cycling comes with its dangers and, in a matter-of-fact tone, describes how she adjusts her own behaviour to keep herself safe. I myself always ride peaceably about 7 or 8 miles an hour. She comes across as intrepid, fearless and much more resigned to the situation on the roads than the cautious and experienced Walker. The only time that Malmesbury does directly address the reader is when she finishes with a humorous rhetorical question, "But what is life if your new white gloves are ruined?" which almost has the effect of a punchline at the end of a joke. The frivolity with which she laughs off what could have been a serious accident belies the seriousness of the event. Both writers use vivid descriptive language to convey their perspectives on cycling in the city. In source A, the graphic and emotive phrase "flesh and bone" highlights the cyclist's vulnerability by reminding readers of the brutal reality of road traffic accidents. This image also contrasts with the earlier image of drivers being cocooned within a ton of metal, which serves to highlight the gross disadvantage that the cyclists are at. The writer also uses an emotive triad, seeking to get to work, to see their friends, to return to their loved ones, to humanise cyclists. They are people with lives of their own who have the same preoccupations and relationships as the drivers. They are not mere annoyances or obstacles that need to be removed as quickly as possible. Malmesbury uses the emotive phrase "inflicting torture on a fellow creature" to describe the actions of the hansom cab driver to evoke the mental anguish which results. By referring to herself as a fellow creature, it has the same effect as Walker's reminder to his readers that cyclists are human beings. Cyclists are not some kind of subspecies deserving of less care and attention, but are equally human. Malmesbury also describes herself as bordering on collapse when she returns home after her first trip, an emotive hyperbolic description designed to convey the terror which she has obviously experienced. Both writers use metaphor and simile to convey the sense that cyclists feel as though their fate is in the hands of another. The writer in source A uses words like gambling on the assumption and roll of the dice to show that he feels he is not in control of his own safety. The vivid imagery that Malmesbury uses with obvious relish relating to hunting and dog racing, such as Prey and A Hare That Feels the Greyhound's Breath, conveys her sense of feeling deliberately targeted as a cyclist on the city's roads, as well as her desire, through the use of deliberately dramatic language, to thrill her readers with a little frisson or shiver of fear. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments section below and I'll do my best to answer them. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more videos on English language topics and exam techniques and English literature texts.